get started with, let's go ahead and create a new application, which we're going to call Filament v4 YT here. We're going to use Livewire as the starter kit. We're going to use Laravel's built-in authentication, and we're going to use Vault in this case. We're going to use Pest and which is the default installation that comes with Laravel. We don't really need to set up much more configuration on our application because we're using SQLite, and we're just showcasing and going through how Filament v4 works. And we're gonna, of course, in this case, also run npm run build and install, and that's it. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and open up our project, and the next step in this course is then to go ahead and compose or require Filament v4 and set up an admin panel. So make sure you go ahead and have selected v4. After you've selected v4 in the Filament docs, we go ahead into installation, and the first thing we want to go ahead and do, because Filament v4 is in beta, you want to go ahead and just cd into our Filament v4 YT project and compose a config minimum stability beta. So what I will go ahead and do is inside our composer.json file, it will basically change this in here. So if you go ahead, it will now be minimum stability beta after this is loaded. So yeah, this will now basically require the project to allow in beta software. This is a neat tool if you ever need to install beta before and you get a composer issue, then you can go ahead and configure it like this from the command line instead of having to type in this yourself. Now, the next thing we need to go ahead and do is compose and require Filament v4. Then we go ahead and install the panels. We're going to use the admin panel as the default one. I would highly recommend going ahead and installing the repo as well on GitHub. And after that's done, we should now be able to access this as well on the URL. So we can go ahead and npm run dev. So if we go ahead now into our .env file here. So go ahead and make sure we have this Filament v4 yt.tests set in here. And then we can go ahead in this case, and we should just be able to head to admin. Now, we don't have a user created, so there's two ways to do this. You can create an account on the website, or we can create a make Filament user, which will basically go ahead and do this in the terminal. So we can go ahead and use the helper here. And if we now head in now, we can essentially go ahead and log in. So now that we have this enabled, we now have basically the Filament v4 thing. The first thing I like to go ahead and do though is inside our admin panel provider, I like to go ahead and just configure a few things. The primary color, I would like that to be violet, because I think that looks a bit better than amber. And then let's go ahead and say the brand name is going to be, in this case, Filament v4 tutorial. And if we go ahead and refresh, we now have this dashboard theme change here. So this stays the same as in previous versions of Filament. You can just go ahead and easily change the primary, secondary, and other colors. We can still go ahead and install plugins in here just like you could in v3. So we could, for example, go ahead in here and have any of the plugins available. Now, for Filament v4, there is already some plugins out. Some of the ones that you may have seen in v3 may not be out yet. So you will have about 2 pages worth of plugins so far and or themes, and that's the ones you can go ahead and install, which are directly promoted on the website. I like to go ahead and install Spotlight though, because it's a really neat plugin and it just helps search functionality a bit in the application. So we may as well go ahead and install that for demonstration purposes on how we can go ahead and do that. So from Filament v2 and onwards, we need to create a custom theme. That's fine. We can quickly go ahead and make a theme. Then if you go ahead to admin.css or theme.css in here, which will be inside here. So inside resources CSS Filament admin, we can just go ahead and make sure we have that there. Then we just need to make Spotlight plugin make. We need to go ahead and import this class, and it would just be imported there. And let's go ahead and take a look at the sign now. In this case, for the Spotlight plugin, we have Command K, And we also need to make sure in this case we use the white theme bit in here in the admin panel provider. So if you go in here, you can see we can specify a white theme, and this needs to be linking to here, otherwise the CSS won't load in. And there we go. We have the dashboard only here, of course, but the next thing we want to go ahead and do is now go ahead and have an article resource that we can go ahead and modify. So inside our create articles table, we want to go ahead and add a few things in here. The first thing I want to go ahead and do in here is I want to add in a string for a title. And we want to have a slug in here, which is going to be unique. We want in here to have a JSON of content. Now, if you're using SQLite, it won't store as a JSON field, but some database schemas support that. And we also want in here to have a status column, which is going to be an enum for status. We're going to add the enum in a minute. And then we're also going to have a foreign ID for user class constraint. And we're going to set it to no on delete. We don't necessarily want to delete the article if the user is gotten rid of in the database. The next thing we want to go ahead and do now is just have an enum made, which we're going to call article status. So inside article status, we want this to be a string. We're going to have a case publish draft archive and public function values to array. And in here, we're going to have array column. And we're going to get the cases in here. We're going to get the value. And now what we can go ahead and do for this enum here is we can go ahead and grab those by saying article. And there we go. So we can go ahead and migrate this now. And we already got our first issue. We need to call this static function. So just need to say static here. And that should fix the problem. So next thing we can go ahead and do now is we can create a filament resource. In this case, we're going to call this for the app models article. Now we're going to go ahead and say we don't want a read-only view page for this resource. We can generate a configuration from the current database columns. And let's take a look at what we've got. So inside our app filament folder, we've got these resources here. So inside article resource, you can already see this looks a bit different from what you may be used to. We actually have the form, which loads in a configure method and the table here. So we go into the articles form, which is in the table and the schemas here. And you can see we have all of this in here instead. So if we take a look at what this may look like, we have all of this here. That's brilliant. We have the columns, and then we have a very basic form here. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do now is take a look inside our article form. We want this to be rich editor. And for this titles, for this slug actually, we want this to be unique. And we want this to be unique to the article class. Probably want to have a minimum length of 2 for the title. And we also want it to pre-fill in the slug when we do it. So to do that, we can go ahead and say on live blur true. And then we're going to go ahead and say after state updated, you're going to have a shorthand function in here. And then we're going to set the slug to be str slug state. There we go. So let's take a look at how this would look now. There we go. So if we go ahead and type anything in here, it automatically generates a slug. For the content, we have everything we need in here. It works as well. The use ID, obviously, I think we can make look a little bit better. So what I'm going to go ahead and do in here is I'm going to say this should be a select. And we're going to go ahead and in here have the ability to have a label in here. We're going to call this author. We're going to include in here the option, which we're going to have a shorthand function for. We're gonna plug the user's name and ID to array. And then we're gonna make it searchable, and we're gonna preload. Now what the preload does is it automatically loads some results, and the searchable makes it searchable. So if you go ahead now, you can see we can actually select the user there. For this one, we can go ahead and have a select. And in this case, for this one, we can go ahead and make it very simple here. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in. And there you go. So we have these here as well. All right, great. So the next thing we want to basically go ahead and do is just go ahead and look at how we can add blocks and other things into our rich editor. So we will take a look at that in a moment. All right, so the next thing we want to go ahead and do now is inside our rich editor, we're going to go ahead and we're going to say, in this case, we want to have the toolbar options in. So we will just go ahead and add this here. There we go. And then after that, we're going to start making custom blocks. So the way I have gone ahead with these custom blocks part is inside the Filament folder, we have the ability to add in this case, I'm going to have a forms, components, rich editor, and I'm going to go ahead and add in hero block for this use case. And we're going to have this just like this. Now in this case, I want to go ahead and extend on the rich editor custom blocks, which adds some method stubs here. So we're going to be adding in get ID. And then we're also going to be having a few other functions in here. So let's go through these in a moment here. So we go ahead, we have the configure editor action, which goes ahead and essentially allows us to add in the fields we want here. In this case, we're just going to have a text input, subheading and heading. We're going to have two preview HTML and two HTML. So we have two different things in here. I'm going to go ahead into our views, and I'm going to go ahead and create a folder in here called blocks previews as well. So we're going to have hero.blade.php. And then we're going to have one inside the previews file as well. So the preview is the one we see inside the editor, and the other one is the one that actually renders in the rich field. And in this case, if we go ahead into our preview, we're just going to have a very basic HTML in here with heading and subheading. And if we go into the other one here, we're just going to have a very basic header as well. So we could also obviously make this more customizable by having the specific call to action button link and so on and all these things here. But this is basically just basic text here. And that's basically the main thing we're going to go ahead and do. So the next thing would be to essentially showing this inside the blocks section here. Now, if we go ahead and close these down and this one down as well, we can go ahead and have a custom blocks hero block class. And this will then go ahead and open up one here where we can say test and test 2. Now we already have the ability to add this in. That's brilliant. The other thing we can do in Filament is add in merge attacks. Now this could be something as simple as just having the name of the application. So if you change the name of whatever your application is called, you could have a merge attack for that. But it could also be more complex things and variables in there. So that's really the sky is the limit basically for that. So you can basically choose what you want to add in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a look inside our article model here. In this case, for now, we'll just say protected guarded to an empty array so that we don't have to add in all the fillable fields. Then in this case, I want to go ahead and implement has rich content. And we're gonna go ahead and say use interacts with rich content. We're also gonna cast, in this case, our content to an array. We also have a user relationship in here we're gonna have. And then we're gonna go ahead in here and have a function called public function setup rich content. In this case, we just go ahead and import all of these models here. We could go ahead in here and have the different things. So let's go ahead and see how that would look. We're gonna go ahead and refresh. We have these two merge attacks, and as you can see, we can also add in a custom block again, and maybe put this as publish. There we go. We have our first article created. So the next step I actually like to take in this case is to go ahead and not only render the article, but we also want to have like a small preview button here in our table. So we could perhaps start out with that before we go ahead and do anything else. So inside our resources, we have this articles table. We could go ahead and make this slug actually sortable. Same for the title and the status. And if we go back in here and see, we have the user ID. So we could say user.name. There we go. So it looks a little bit better. And we could make this a badge. And outside of that, let's go ahead and make sure the slug here is actually a URL. So in this case, we're just going to have a shorthand function here, which is going to go to articles to show. So let's go ahead and quickly add that in here. For now, articles to show is just going to be a very, very simple one. So yeah. And yeah, that should hopefully have us a small hoverable link, and it gets us to the welcome page, which is what we want, but with the slug here in the bar. So the next thing I want to go ahead and do is I want to add a preview button, which we can do inside record action. So we can have an action actually before the edit, and we're gonna call this preview. We're gonna have this as a label with preview in it. Just gonna add this into a new page. Icon is gonna be hero icon and we're gonna have the color of secondary. We're gonna have a UL again. We can actually just go ahead and copy that. So if we just go down here, then we can open this in a new tab. Exactly the same function, but this is a nice preview one here. Yeah, so that's basically how we can do the very basic bits. Now, to actually preview the article, let's go ahead and make a controller. And we're going to call this article view. Actually, sorry, let's make a livewire component. And we're going to call this article page inside pages. So if you go to article page, we are going to return view. You're going to have a public article, and we're going to go ahead and get rid of this shorthand function and say article page class. I want to go ahead and quickly import this, and we get to the dashboard here. Now, one thing I want to go ahead and do in this one here is to our layout file, actually, sorry, to our app blade.php. You see, we use sidebar, but we can use header instead. And then if you go to the header, the blade.php, close down the terminal perhaps. In here we have this menu. We can say this is only if you're authenticated, you show this. Otherwise, we're going to end authentication. Just move this up a tab. And yeah, that now at least covers some of it here. I am going to get rid of these nav links here because we don't really need them. There we go. So now we have this page here for the article page. So the next thing we can go ahead and do inside article page is just render some bits in there. In here we're gonna have article, render rich content, and just add in content here. And you can see we have this username, we have the header here and all of that. Now, obviously, we could go ahead and add more styling to it. We could add it inside a basic card if we want to, but we can look at that in a bit. I think the next thing to do is just add in an MX auto and a container for now in here. So that will essentially just center this a bit more. Now, obviously, you may not want to do that depending on how you're structuring your blog. But if we go ahead and open up a new one, we should go ahead and work on the next page, which is going to be the category one. So for the category one, we want to go into the create categories table. In here, we want to have a name and we want to have a JSON of content. The next thing we want to go ahead and do is then add a migration for the relationship between the category and the article. Now, in this case, we want to say create article category table. Now, it's important to Laravel goes in alphabetical order, so you should go by article first and then category. So if we head into our database, into article category, we should go ahead in here and add a few relationships. In this case, we are essentially going ahead and adding in the article ID and the category ID. And if we go ahead and migrate this, we got an error. We don't actually need the ID in here, so let's go and get rid of that. And if we go ahead now and take a look, it still works. So the first thing I want to do now is just make a filament resource called category resource. And if we head into our category resource, we want to go ahead in here and just quickly take a look at what that looks like in here. So it has everything we need. Only thing is, you could go ahead and extend this, by the way, to use multiple things like blocks and that, but I'm just going to leave it at that. So just want to rich editor. So we're going to go ahead and create a Laravel category. And actually, while we're at it, let's steal something from our article form, where we just quickly make the title and the name automatically update like this. And make this unique to the category model instead. So if we go ahead and create a new category called Laravel, we got an issue here. We can just go ahead and fix this inside here by adding in protected guarded. Go ahead and resubmit it, and that's it. And we have this lovely small table here as well. So let's go ahead and actually add in a category in here so we can select the category in our article form. In this case, we're going to have them select what we're going to call this categories. We're going to have this in here with a label. We're going to add in multiple. We're going to make it searchable, preload items. We're also going to have a relationship in here to this case categories, name, and we are just going to make sure in here that we have the relevant relationships in our models. So for this case, I want to just go ahead and add in an articles one here with timestamps. And if we go into our article model, we're just going to do the same thing. Now, if we go ahead now, we should be able to save the changes and it stores it. Perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and make this a full span here. And I'm also going to go ahead and add a neat little feature here. So we can have like a small plus button here so we can add a new modal so we don't even have to go to the categories page in case you think of a new category while creating an article. that's a neat little feature that will save us some time. Now, the concept is really simple and it's the same as in previous version of Filament. So what we just need to do is have a create option using. We're gonna format the slug and add in the data, and then we're just gonna have exactly the same things in here. And that's basically it. So if you want to go ahead and have a PHP in here, we have this one added, and that's it. Now we have 2 categories in here, and we have articles, and yeah, we have basically got some of the very basic features in Filament 4. There is other ones to look at, and this is just the beginning, but thank you very much for watching this introduction course to some of the most interesting and basic things in Filament 4. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.